Visiting with the radio voice of the Washington Capitals and my good friend, John Walton. And we're talking about the NHL with a return to play plan. And John, there's a lot to get to as we discuss this. But why don't we just start the quick takeaways right now? The Capitals end up as a third seed in the Eastern Conference. And we're not looking really until game action at the very earliest until late July, because there's a lot of preparation time that has to go into the actual return to play.
Yeah, and Dave, I guess the real takeaway from today is the NHL, the first of the four major sports to have a plan, but there is no guarantee of when that plan will be put into place. And we don't want to get too far ahead in placing hope on, okay, this is moving forward. That is the hope that it is going to happen, where you can start to have players in small groups maybe as soon as next week, with Virginia's order getting lifted in Northern Virginia maybe as soon as Friday. You can start to have small groups of players back in Arlington, and the Caps not formal practices, but able to get back on the ice in small groups. Now, that means no formal full practices. That will not happen, according to the NHL, until at least July 1st. So as we sit here still in the month of May, Dave, we're a ways away. But we know now there's going to be 24 teams. The Caps will be in, obviously, as a division champ for the fifth year in a row. We now know that. The regular season officially today has come to an end. But we don't know who they're going to play because there's a lot of variables in this 2014 format they've announced.
Yeah, and again, the third seed right now, but the way they have it, the top four teams playing a round-robin tournament to determine another seeding, because in theory the Capitals could drop to fourth or could go all the way to the top seed in the Eastern Conference. So that's a new development, while the other 8 teams play for the right to play one of those 4 teams, the top 4 seeds.
Yeah, there is no perfect plan to try and get going, and we're all living under, putting it together with duct tape and bubble gum and chicken wire, regardless of the league at this point. I mean, the NBA is no doubt going to follow suit here in the coming days. But the reason for 24 teams was because if you cut it off at the normal 16, you had teams like the New York Islanders that had not played as many games as other teams, like the Capitals. They were in ninth. They were a point out. And they weren't able to have a chance to try and regain their footing and get into the top 8 of the Eastern Conference. So now, if you were close enough to getting within, let's call it spitting distance in the Eastern Conference, instead of the top 8, you take the top 12. The advantage you get from being a top 4 seed, like the Capitals are, is that you know that you're in the first round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs. If you finished 5th or below, to go from 5th to 12th, you are like Pittsburgh, finished 5th. Pittsburgh is not involved in the top 4, so now they've got to play what will be, we believe, a best of 5 qualifying series before you can get to the first round itself. It's possible that Pittsburgh technically wouldn't get into the first round of the playoffs, even though they were in a playoff seed at the time. I bring that example up because they get the best goaltender in the league, in many people's opinions, and Carey Price, and the 12th seeded Montreal Canadiens. So no doubt Pittsburgh not happy. But there's always things, Dave, that I think you could look at any team of the 24 and say, hey, listen, it's not perfect, but it'll have to do, and everybody's got a shot. And one thing we do know, it's going to be entertaining. It's going to be exciting.
It'll be a wild summer, and full credit to the NHL and the players. It clearly was a well-thought-out plan, and indeed, we're talking basically a 2 or 3 week training camp, right? It starts in July when the teams can actually get together and train as full teams. And for a sport where all the players, for all intents and purposes, have been off the ice for a couple of months now, that period will be so important.
Let me give you just a little bit of perspective on how long this layoff has been. If the Capitals do not get back to game action for the Stanley Cup playoffs until the very end of July, and that is the expectation at this point, there will be more days in the pause from March 12th until the resumption of play in late July than the Capitals had between when they won the Stanley Cup in Las Vegas and when they raised the banner in October. It's all the same season. It boggles the mind to think about, but to that end, you need a lot of time, as you said, to be able to be up and running. You get 3 weeks worth, in all likelihood, of practices with the coaches on ice, and the hope is that you're able to get back into game shape fairly quickly. Most players have been able to stay more or less in shape here, but they haven't been on the ice. I mean, John Carlson said just days ago he hasn't been on the ice since the Capitals played in Buffalo back on March 10th. So, and most players are in that category.
And there's so many layers to this. Oh, by the way, where are these teams going to play? And that still has not been determined. What is it, 8 potential cities, and they want to come up with 2 hub cities from that. So while there's a return to play today, there's still several important details to be worked out.
There are, and even more important than the hub cities potentially, because you're not going to have fans at them. We know that much, but we don't even know at this point, Dave, the length of the first round and the second round. It could be best of 5. It could be best of 7. It could be 5 in the first round and 7 in the second round. It could be 5 even in the second round. And I think they wanted to leave themselves a little bit of wiggle room, Dave, just because we don't know the timing. If you can start on July 1, you're probably looking at 7-game series, much like you would expect in a Stanley Cup playoff. If it ends up being the middle of July before you can get training camps going, and it may be into August before you can start playing, and maybe even mid-August, well, now you're talking about some shorter first and second round matchups. And if you're wondering on the other side, exactly what does this do to next season, because you're looking at crowning a Stanley Cup champion potentially on or about the 1st of October, maybe even the middle of October. If that happens, you're looking at January for the start of next season. And the league they certainly want to, and they seem intent on wanting to play 82 games, Dave. So you may push even next summer. You may be going well into June, July, in and around August 1. It may be a while. It may be years before we get back on track entirely. But like everyone else in every walk of life, you're just trying to do the best you can in the moment and in the circumstances we're dealing with. And, I think the commissioner and Don Fair and the NHLPA have done a pretty good job at doing that.
And you mentioned that, and again, we still have to get through the first part of welcoming players back. But, maybe the whole season, Gary Bettman even hinted we'll start with the next season, we'll start with the Winter Classic. So that could be the launching pad to amplify what you were saying about January.
Yeah, I mean, you think about the NBA and what a big day Christmas Day is, and you wonder if the NBA isn't going to be looking at something similar before this, and maybe that gap that the players need in that off season comes in the fall at a time that we wouldn't normally have it. But, as far as the Caps are concerned, the one thing that every team's coming into this new thing relatively healthy, assume they're able to get started. The Caps were relatively healthy at the pause. It's just a matter of getting back into game shape. But, a chance for a second Stanley Cup in 3 years. You mentioned the hub cities. There are 7 of them that are in the Western Conference. And I don't think it's going to matter, where the city is. Once you're there, you're there. I think it's, the importance is the safety of the players and the staff that go. We do know that only 50 people total from each NHL team will travel to these sites. So that is an expanded roster, you would think. I don't know if that number is going to be 30, but it's got to be pretty close to 30. So you have between the coaches and the training staff and the equipment staff, a very, very short list of people who are actually going to travel on site in order to try and keep as contained as possible and try and get this thing concluded with a Stanley Cup champion. And
again, they've chosen 8 finalists for hub cities. But one of the reasons why here on May 27th and 26th we're not talking about it, it may determine how that city is in July, whether it's selected as a hub city. Is that part of the rationale?
Yeah, I think you have a number of cities because you've got to look at number of cases, where are things declining? It's not just facility. It's not just hotel space. On hotel space and ice alone, Vegas is a real possibility because T-Mobile Arena is state-of-the-art. You have thousands upon thousands of hotel rooms at the south end of the Las Vegas Strip that you can house as many of staff that you needed to or wanted to. Vegas seems to be a strong possibility. We're here in Columbus. In the East is a strong possibility. They have their own practice rink contained within Nationwide Arena. They have the hotel space that is very walkable in downtown Columbus. But there are others. Minneapolis, St. Paul has been mentioned. Pittsburgh has been mentioned. 3 Canadian cities. The problem with Canada right now, Dave, is with the border being closed right now, and Canada has said that they mandate anybody coming in the country, even if they're allowed in for work reasons, you have to quarantine for 14 days. That would be 14 days that you wouldn't get on this side of the border. It's entirely possible that it won't be in a Canadian city, although obviously for the heritage of the game, they'd like to. But they may have trouble doing that. I think we're going to find out here in the coming days and weeks if a Canadian city is able to even host without that quarantine period.
Well, Never before had to deal with something like this, and as a result, never before had to discuss a plan like this. But the NHL certainly is thinking of everything and continues. It no doubt will evolve. You mentioned that, by the way, there's the hockey to talk about here. And you talked about every team will be healthy. It promises to be a wild playoffs. No fans, but that hunger to get back and win another Stanley Cup. How much do you think that will be a factor? I mean, every team wants to win a Stanley Cup, but it didn't go well for the Capitals in return to the playoffs last season.
They were a tired team in 2019 and maybe ripe for the picking in a Game 7 against Carolina, but as rested as they are, I've seen Alex Ovechkin's videos. Alex has had his trainer living with him in his home during this time. Unless you think Alex isn't going to be ready to ramp up and do this all over again and do it rested and ready to go. Dave, this Stanley Cup playoff, I think it's pretty clear when you have as many teams as there are and everybody is on a relatively equal footing, and you're going to have, the health of the players, from normal hockey injuries, not talking about coronavirus COVID type stuff right now. Everything's going to be pretty equal. It's going to be a tournament of momentum. If you get it coming out of, say, this qualifying round, and even if you just barely made the cut, like Montreal, who's got a pretty good goaltender in Carey Price, or Chicago, who never would have probably been near the playoffs in the Western Conference. But if you get some momentum and you start to believe anything's possible, because we've never done anything like this before. So I think the cream will eventually rise to the top. I absolutely foresee some upsets coming out of, or what we would think were upsets, but just because of the different circumstances, maybe things change a little bit. But I think that once you get back to the hockey, I mean, the Capitals still have the best top six, or one of them, in the NHL. They had just gotten Ilya Kovalchuk, and the bottom six was starting to gel at the time of the pause. Braden Holtby was playing pretty well. The defensive core has had their ups and downs. I think that's the one thing you're going to look at with the Caps when they get going. But by and large, I mean, this is a team that was built to win beforehand, and there's no reason to think after the rest that they won't have a chance to do it again.
Some radio announcer said it was okay to believe a couple springs ago. So is it okay to believe this summer in this Capitals team?
It's okay to believe that hockey might return. We're going to keep believing, Dave, just like the NBA, as far as the Wizards are concerned, and the Redskins getting back hopefully to business. And look, we all hopefully get back to normal here as 2020 winds on through, but it's going to be very different to wrap up this season, no matter what happens next.
But maybe that's the bottom line, that there's a plan. And all you can do at this point, everyone involved in the game, and that includes fans, is hope that you can move one step closer to that plan.
Yeah, and I think, the next week is a first step. It's a small one, but if you start getting players back in small groups and informal skates, I mean, at least they're getting back on the ice. That's step one. And if everybody, there are a lot of guys who are still overseas that need to come back. Jacob Brana went home. We've got Samsonov is home. You've got Siegenthaler at home. You've got, I think, somewhere in the vicinity of 20-25% of the players left the U.S., left North America. So you're going to have some guys that need to get back. You're going to almost by that, you're going to have smaller groups anyway, because you don't have everybody here yet. But in the next couple of weeks, the guys start coming back. They start seeing staff, the medical staff, and making sure that these guys, no virus concerns are safe. I mean, that's the thing, Dave. Everybody's got to be, as safe as we can possibly make it in our game to be able to have the tournament and have a finish, and hopefully get back to being a welcome diversion for folks who, I'm sure across the board, we all could use it. It'd be nice to have hockey back on the landscape.
Well, John, as always, appreciate the time, and I guess here's the summer hockey, right?
It's okay to believe in summer hockey, Dave. Thank you.